For most of my career, people called me Ranger Mark. These days, my grandkids call me Ranger PamPaw, and that feels about right. I've been visiting national parks for as long as I can remember. My first visit was to Big Bend National Park when I was 1 year old. I don't remember it, but the parks remembered me. As I grew up, my love for these places grew with me. They weren't just destinations, they were places that shaped how I saw the world. And in 1989, I got my dream job. I became a National Park Ranger. After nearly 4 decades with the National Park Service, I've stepped out of the uniform, but I haven't stepped away from the parks. I'm Mark Tezel, Ranger PamPaw, and this is the Ranger PamPaw Podcast. Let's get started. Hi everyone, I'm Mark Tezel and welcome to the Ranger PamPaw Podcast. Thought I'd start off by explaining why Ranger PamPaw, how that name came about. For the past 12 years or so, I've been working out of my home and training in the National Park Service while I was affiliated with the Washington office in the Park Facility Management Division and later the Historic Preservation Training Center. My duty station was here in my home in a small office that I set up. I went around to all the parks to do various training events, but always came back here to San Antonio, my home base. Flash forward a few years to when I started having grandchildren. We now have 4 grandchildren, a 5th one on the way next month, so we're super excited about that. But my 2 oldest grandchildren, Adeline and Emerson, always enjoyed coming into my office. A few months ago, actually about a year and a half ago, they would start coming into my office, looking at my office, like to sit in my chair. Even sometimes if I was on a meeting with the rest of my team, they would join in with the meetings from time to time. But they also liked the things I had around my office. I have a few little toys, you might call them. Here's my Ranger action figure. They like to play with that a lot. I have a little Ranger car, National Park Ranger car. It's a little bit dated nowadays, but yep, there that is. And then because from time to time I would be in uniform on camera from my office, I had a Ranger shirt and of course the famous Ranger flat hat right here. A few months ago, before I retired, both Addie and Emerson were here with me in my office and we were playing around, playing a little bit of dress up. So we would put the hat on to each other. Emerson put the hat on and said, Ranger Emerson. And then Addie put on a hat and said, I'm Ranger Addie. Then they put the hat on me and said, well, you're Ranger PamPaw. So that's where the name comes from. I am now Ranger PamPaw. Flash forward again to December 31st, 2025, just a few weeks ago, I officially retired from the National Park Service. So I'm no longer Ranger Mark, as I used to be called when I was out in the field. But now my grandkids call me Ranger PamPaw. So retirement is not necessarily an end for me. It's a new chapter. Last week, my wife Alicia and I got to spend some time in Big Bend National Park, one of our favorites. We've been to several times. I've been to quite a bit, either for work or for fun. And while it's a different experience for me, for the first time I visited Big Bend not as a National Park Service employee, but as just a regular visitor for the first time in many years. During that time, I enjoyed myself, of course, but I also kept flashing back to my Ranger days. I started noticing some of the things that were going on. I know they have a couple of big projects coming on where they can be working up in the Tezel Basin for the next couple of years, and I know a little bit about that, so I was scoping out what was happening around that. Noticed some of the changes in the park over the past year. I also noticed, sadly, that the park is hurting staff-wise, it appears. So while I still have a little bit of that Ranger side of me, I'm transitioning into this new role where I'm not going to necessarily be an employee of the Park Service, be responsible for a lot of this, but I want to become a good steward, and I hope you do as well. So that's what this podcast is all about. We can take a journey as being stewards of our national parks. So let's go on. So as I start this journey into retirement and we start this journey together in podcasting, thought I'd reflect back a little bit on my journey with the national parks. As you might have seen in the cold open, my first visit to a national park was at age 1. In 1964, my parents, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle took me to Big Bend National Park. We explored all the park from Santa Elena Canyon to Boquillas Canyon and up in the Tezel Mountains. And of course, I don't remember that visit. I was only 1 year old, but my grandmother took those 8mm movies. And so it shows how the parks first got a hold of me. So we went through the years. We'd visit parks like Padre Island National Seashore, where my parents might take us on a trip with the church youth group, where we'd experience sand and surf at the seashore. We might drive 50 miles north of here to the LBJ Ranch in Lyndon B. Johnson National Historical Park, where we learn a little bit about President Johnson's legacy, and we learn a little bit about ranching in Texas. Every summer, my parents would take us out to Colorado for a summer vacation in the mountains, and there I got to visit parks like Mesa Verde, Great Sand Dunes, Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and of course Rocky Mountain National Park. It was really on those trips, camping out in the national forest, visiting the national parks, that my love for the parks became entrenched in me. I began to think about maybe I would want to be a park ranger when I grew up, and so that started working towards that. Little did I know growing up as well that my grandma lived 2 miles from what would become San Antonio Missions National Historical Park. We visited the missions often before they became a park, but in 1978, President Carter signed the bill making the missions, the 4 missions of Concepcion, San Jose, San Juan, and Espada, a park, San Antonio Missions National Historical Park. And we visited them a little bit more often there, learning about Spanish colonial history, learning about how they built acequias and farmland that was irrigated by those acequias. And really, again, I learned to love the national parks. It was in 1988, when I was in college in Seguin, Texas, at Texas Lutheran College, that I stopped one day on the way home at San Antonio Missions. It was about halfway between college and my home, and I offered to volunteer. And so the Friday after Thanksgiving in 1988, I spent my first afternoon volunteering at San Antonio Missions. I did that for several months, and during that time, I came to know the folks on the staff there, and they came to know me, and they suggested that maybe I'd apply to become a seasonal park ranger, which I did, and in May of 1989, I started my first position as a seasonal park ranger interpretation at San Antonio Missions. During that time, I worked a little bit at the missions, but they found out that I also had some computer skills, so I moved into the office quite a bit. This was back when there was only 4 computers in the whole park, and I helped set up some computer programs, things like that. But my real love was being out in the field, working with in the missions themselves, working with visitors and working with the resources. Fast forward a little bit to when my wife and I met. And our first trip together as a couple while we were dating was back to Big Bend. And now I have a whole different perspective. As we're starting to start a family, and visiting the parks become not just an experience for me, but for experience that helps bring my family together. We took our two youngest boys to Big Bend quite a bit. We took our kids to Padre Island quite a bit. Visit a national park whenever. And I saw the parks in a different light as a parent now. And it really changes your perspective as you look at them as a parent. And now as we're moving into retirement, my wife and I like to travel quite a bit. We're going to try to visit as many of the national park sites as we can. We probably won't get to all 440 of them, but I'm over halfway there right now. We're also going to try to visit as many of the quote-unquote national parks, the 63 that are actually designated as national parks. And we're getting close. I'm at 54 right now. Virgin Islands National Park. I just visited in January, so that was my 54th national park, so I only have 9 more to go to get to the 63 national parks, and we're going to try to fit in as many of those other types of units as well. But as we are starting to enjoy retirement, starting to move into retirement, we're now ready to share the national parks with our grandkids, and I think they're ready for those journeys as well. So that's a little bit about my journey in the national parks. Hope you have similar experience as well, and let's share those experiences over the next few years as we do this podcast together. So, a little bit about what this podcast is and what it is not. First of all, people say I'm a storyteller, so I'm going to share with you a bunch of stories from my experience in the national parks, both as a visitor and as an employee. I also want to share with you a little bit of context, a little bit of background about what's going on. A lot of times you might hear something about a park or the Park Service in general and not really understand what's going on, so I'm going to share a little bit of that from my experience. And then a lot of practical wisdom. Practical wisdom to help you explore the parks better, to help you understand their stories, and help you understand what you're seeing when you visit a national park. I also hope to add a little bit of perspective from a family person. Like I said, my wife and my family have experienced many national parks together, brought in a whole new perspective when I had kids taking them into the national parks. So I hope to share a little bit about that. But as we're moving into our retirement as well, I'm going to share a little bit about what it is like to go as a retiree. And I really want to share a little bit about my excitement about taking my grandkids to the national parks. What this won't be is a lot of hype, a lot of, you got to go see this right now. This is the greatest place ever. There's a little bit of too much of that out there in the podcast world, in the social media world. Also try to steer away from politics. Now that one's going to be hard because the National Park Service is a federal agency. And of course, politics is involved in a lot of stuff that's going on right now. I'm not going to go on some diatribe about what's going wrong or the political parties, how they're influencing things, but I do want to keep you informed about how certain policies might affect the national parks and your visits to them as well. And there's a lot of travel checklists out there, so I'm not going to turn this into a travel checklist for the national parks. I will give you some tips, some ideas of what to do when you're visiting a national park, but I'm not going to say you got to go see Angel's Landing when you're at Zion National Park. There's a lot of that out there, and I want you to experience the parks on your own. I think the national parks are best experienced as a personal thing. So I want to give you some tips to help enhance that experience as you visit the national parks, but I'm not going to give you travel checklist for that. I do promise throughout this whole series that we will have a Ranger honest tone, sort of a term I've come up with saying Rangers try to give you the best understanding of the national parks, give you the best information that they have, and so I'm going to do the same as we go through this podcast series. So that's what Ranger PamPaw Podcast is all about, and it's all about you as well. So as we go along, if you have any questions or things, I'll give you an email to send them to me in the end, or you can put them in the comments, and we always will try to make this a conversation between us. So I want to take a little time right now to talk a little bit about why parks still matter. Why does the National Park Service still matter? And to do that, I want to go to the National Park Service Organic Act of 1916. Just a little background about this. Before 1916, there were about 20 national parks that had been created, starting with Yellowstone, Yosemite, Sequoia, all those parks. But they were run by different agencies in the federal government, run in different variety of ways. And so a man by the name of Stephen Mather, who was a wealthy borax miner, came to love the national parks and started to push Congress to create a single agency to help manage these parks so that they would be run more efficiently and in a better manner. In doing so, Congress eventually passed the National Park Service Organic Act 1916, which created the National Park Service. And their charge to the National Park Service was to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife that are within the national parks, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such a manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. What this means is that we are setting aside these places where we have our most significant natural and cultural places in the country, that we will preserve them for future generations, but at the same time by providing for their enjoyment right now. The author and historian and conservationist Walter Stegner later called the national parks the best idea we ever had. I really like that a lot. National park sites are examples of the best of our country has to offer, set aside to preserve them for future generations while we are enjoying them right now. And by the best, I mean we have a lot of superlatives of our nation in the national parks. The highest peak, Denali, the lowest point, Badwater Basin in Death Valley National Park. The deepest lake is Crater Lake National Park. The largest living thing in the world is at Sequoia. The tallest living things are the redwoods in California. The oldest living thing, the bristlecone pines in Great Basin National Park. They were saplings at the time of Jesus. What's in the national parks today is really the superlatives of our nation. But not only do the national parks preserve those natural wonders, but they also tell our story, starting with the very earliest Americans in places like Mesa Verde National Park and other sites across the Southwest and even up into Alaska and out east. They celebrate the arrival of the Europeans in places like Colonial National Historical Park, San Antonio Missions with the Spanish story, and other Spanish sites across the country, and other places where Europeans came into the country, like in Florida and things like that. When we came to the point where we were becoming a nation, the Revolutionary War sites preserved that story of us fighting for our independence, and all the way down to the Independence National Historical Park in Philadelphia, where the Declaration of Independence was eventually signed. There's some historic sites related to the early days of our country all the way up until the Civil War. And then when that great schism between the states happens, we have a lot of Civil War sites preserved within the national park system. After the Civil War, we still preserve that story. Places like Statue of Liberty National Monument, which has Ellis Island and the whole immigration story of our country. Civil rights sites across the country as well tell the story of a nation that was building upon itself as we've gone for the past 250 years. All of these sites are set aside for us to explore together and for our future generations to explore. It's a thing of stewardship versus ownership. We don't individually own these sites like a lot of historic sites in Europe are done, but we own them together as a nation, as a people. And as a people, we need to become good stewards of this. So as we visit the national parks, we need to learn how to learn about them, explore them, experience them, have fun in them, but also make sure that we help preserve them for future generations. So what can you expect from season 1 of the Ranger PamPaw Podcast? We want to drop these episodes every 2 weeks or so. So in 2 weeks, join us for an episode I'm calling Lifetime in the National Parks. It's going to be a story-driven look at how my career inside the National Park Service changed the way I see these places and the people that surround them. Then following that, in the next few months, we're going to have episodes on how parks really works, some ranger stories and park wisdom, some fire, flood, and change, how things are happening naturally in the National Park Service, a little bit about wildlife, some myths and misconceptions, and then we're in the season with why I do it all again. We'll be lining up some guests here and there to help join in the conversation with the national parks. I want you to join the conversation as well. And the easiest way to do that is drop comments in the comment section, Or join us on the Ranger PamPaw page, which is www.tetzelsontheroad.com/Ranger PamPaw. Or email me at rangerpampaw@tetzelsontheroad.com. And a great way to build up this community around conversation about the national parks is to like and subscribe on YouTube or any other favorite podcast platforms. We hope to see you around in the national parks and back here in 2 weeks for our next episode of the Ranger PamPaw Podcast. Thanks for joining us today, and join us again soon.